All right. Hello, everyone. Um, we'll kind of wait before getting real started with any discussion here for a couple minutes. Let's let everybody get in, say hi. I am very excited to talk about this one because while this was not my favorite of the series so far, I definitely am looking forward to what's going to be the ultimate ending of this series. So, for those of you that are brand new or are joining us today, hello, Maya. Welcome, welcome. So if you guys are just joining us today, this is a live show where we're going to be discussing the Obelisk Gate, which I apparently don't have right here with me for some reason. It's probably upstairs. Hi, Elises. Welcome. Welcome. So yes, we're going to be talking about the Obelisk Gate, which is the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. This live show is going to contain some spoilers. We'll try to keep it as, pretty quiet as possible in terms of just focusing on the book that we are currently reading, which was for this month, for February, The Obelisk Gate, and then also talking about the 5th season. So if you have not read both of them, I would suggest moving away from the live show and maybe coming back later when you finished either of those books. So just so that you don't get spoiled for anything, we're not going to be talking about anything in terms of the final book because most of us that are reading this for the first time, including myself, do not know what's going on with book 3. So I haven't read the full series, so I'm hoping there won't be any spoilers for the 3rd book. There will not. I have not read the 3rd book as of yet. That is actually our March read. So anyone that needs an update on the schedule, somebody's knocking on my window.
I can speculate what happened, but I haven't read it.
Apparently my husband took Oscar outside for a walk, and he scared me because he just tapped on the window and scared the crap out of me. So yeah, we won't be talking about any spoilers about the Stone Sky. That's our March read. But we will be talking about pretty in-depth in terms of our thoughts and theories going into book 3, what we're hoping to see, what we're going to be looking into in terms of the synopsis and all that stuff. So with that, why don't we get started? So Courtney, you also had created a video reviewing the Obelisk Gate, which was absolutely amazing. I think that you talked about the synopsis way better than I could have ever even tried because there was so much going on, it felt like, all at one time. So what were your general thoughts on the Obelisk Gate, for those that haven't seen your video?
Well, I like that there was different perspectives. Like in the first book, we had, of course, 3 perspectives of one character. And then in this one, I'd say about 4 different perspectives. So I like that because that helped build the story, but still allowed you to have some gaps so that, in the last book, you have some room to still speculate at what happens. I do think that I enjoyed this book. I don't know why I enjoyed this one more, even though I did feel like I'm hesitant to say nothing really happened, but in a way I kind of feel that way because there were some key things that were shockers. It's kind of like a slow build up. Then you're like, bam, what was that? And then you calm back down to, just the plot where they're just sitting in time in one particular location. So, but overall, I did like it. I liked the world building that is continuing. It's slow. I thought it was a bit slower, because you got to see Nassoon's area. So that piece of the puzzle came together. But I think this one was more about character development, I think, than anything. But I did enjoy this one. I don't know why. For some reason, I think I enjoyed this book more than the first one. But I'm definitely excited to hit it home and see where this book is going to end.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that this one was definitely much slower. And I do agree that it also was a lot of character development. I would say that there was some world building in terms of understanding what Alabaster's main goal was in the first place. But I would agree that I think that this heavily relied on that character development, particularly on the characters of Shappa and Nasun and Hoa, and learning a lot about Hoa and what happened with him and why he's been traveling around with Essen for so long. And, but like I think that part of the reason why it felt like there wasn't a lot just was because personally, I thought that they were things we didn't necessarily need to know, but would have been really cool to see to flesh out the world a little bit more and flesh out some of the characters. But it otherwise felt like there wasn't much, even with Esun, because it was very much everything happened at like the very, very end. And then now it's like, okay, well, what's the consequences of this? So I would agree with you there.
Yeah, I felt that this was I feel like this was very much, hey, Pat, I felt like this book was just very much a filler, which I know this is going to sound so crazy, but I kept thinking of Twilight, right? How I felt like Eclipse was kind of like a filler, New Moon and Eclipse. And I kept thinking that this is just a filler book to, you have the intro, you have your filler book, and bam, now you have all the craziness that happens in the end. That's why I don't know, for some reason, I just kept thinking that.
I feel like I think you're onto something there though, because from what I remember seeing of people's reviews when reading this too, is that this did for a lot of people feel like that middle book syndrome kind of issue, which with any series that is more than 2 books, that is something you're going to find, because the author on one hand does have to really focus a lot of attention on things that maybe didn't get that attention in the first book, but doesn't necessarily further the plot, but has to build the world so much more. So I think that no matter what genre you get into as an author, if you end up having a book that's or a series that's more than 2 books, there's going to be at least one of those middle books that's just not going to hit as hard for a lot of people. And I think that that's usually just something you have to kind of go into a series knowing, is you're going to have some slow parts. It didn't change the way of how much I loved the first book for me, but I think it definitely did just in general be very slow for me, where I was like, okay, can we move on to the next thing? I don't care about this person. I don't want to know about this person, really. They don't matter to me. I want to know what's going on with my main girl.
Yeah. I feel overall, though, that this is a slow, while there's action, I do think just overall this series, which I did not expect, I do think overall it is a slow burn. I think it's an appropriate pace slow burn, but I do think it's a slow burn. So I think that middle syndrome book, I guess that's why I liked it, because I felt like a lot of the questions, because I said before, like the magic and the earth stuff, while I think it's cool, I'm not so much invested in it because I can't really kind of visualize it so much. So while I think that's cool, the characters I was more invested in. And I think this gave a lot of backstory to a lot of that. So now I feel like questions and things were answered. So hopefully the last book just kind of knocks it out in the park with, the action, since we kind of know what's going on.
Yeah, I'm thinking that from what I remember of people talking about the series is that book 3 ends up being that more splash ending, which I'm also looking forward to. I think that especially the way that things ended toward the end of one particular character's story, this is going to get very interesting, which we'll talk about in a minute, because I want to go through the book kind of almost piece by piece this time and see kind of what are some things that have transferred from book 1 to book 2. But Elise's agrees it was definitely very slow. Yep. Really loved this book so much. Not sure which book I loved more. I'm so happy you enjoyed it. I really am. Like as much as I, didn't like it as much as book 1, I still really enjoyed this a lot. And I think Courtney would also agree. Nasun scares me. She's more powerful than Esun at 10 years old. She's also easily manipulated. This is actually something I did want to talk about too, is the character of Nasun. So hold your horses there. Elise's will get to her. Book 2 wasn't bad, but the first book felt a bit more special to me. I think that was what I felt too, honestly. It was great. It was perfectly fine. It just didn't have the same level that the 5th season did with this first read. It didn't hit the way that I was hoping it was going to, like the 5th season did. And that's okay. Not every one of somebody's books is going to do that for you, especially in a series. 8 years old. She's close enough. Okay, so with that, let's get into kind of some of the main topics that are involved in this story. The first of which is our main character, Essun. So by the end of the 5th season, we see Essun become reunited with a character named Alabaster, who was not only her lover at one point, but was in some ways a bit of a mentor. And he was also the father of one of her children, who they did end up in the 5th season, you learn, having to kill because it was in order to protect him. And she had thought him dead for several years. And essentially, what we learn in the Obelisk Gate is that he is not only the reason that the 5th season has started, as was shown in the prologue and by the end of the 5th season itself, but we also learn that he specifically believes that Essun is the key to saving the world and fixing the world. And if anybody didn't catch that, the way that he believes that is that he thinks that Essun is able to basically bring the moon back into orbit, because the obelisks, which in this world carry a lot of magical power, have a lot of real essence in terms of being kind of like the first things in this world that had magic in a sense. They created the problem of the moon being knocked out of orbit, which then caused Father Earth to be really, really upset with the Origins and feel as if they were cursed, which I think in some ways plays into the ostracizing of these people in some way. And Alabaster has known that the way to fix this would be to bring the moon back into orbit, but he's not able to do it himself. So he believes that Essun is the one to do it. So basically with Essun, she's been traveling, as we've seen her, trying to find her daughter Nessun. But when this whole thing with Alabaster comes around and she learns of this purpose that he believes her to have in this world, she kind of starts to decide to help him. And they meet up with a community that is very much full of Origins, and she infiltrates them in a sense where she just kind of becomes one of them. But you see that within the different comms, there is a lot of infighting, which is another topic I want to get into that I think touches a little bit on what we talked about in the 5th season live show about the kinds of othering within marginalized groups. So let's start off talking about that line of plot, because there also is more that happens within that infighting and within all of that we can kind of divulge as time goes on. So my first thing I want to talk about is how interesting is it to you that Alabaster, who we kind of saw in book 1, being this kind of like, I'm in a sense holier than thou, I am the strongest one, I'm the one that's going to do all these things. I think it was really refreshing to see him kind of knocked off his high horse and asking for help, because he probably would not have done that if he did not have somebody like Essun around him. What are your thoughts on that, Courtney?
I agree. I think Alabaster definitely has I don't want to say attitude, but he definitely has an ego. And, the idea of him being, I guess we could say sick because he is in infirmary, but he's, being turned to stone. But yeah, I think that definitely humbled him because he couldn't do it alone. And so I did like to see that part of him, but I also still like that he still carried that, like, that frustration with her and gave her just as much as she gave him, as far as with kind of having an attitude. So I thought that was really good. But I also like the fact that he trusted her so much. But I also thought it was interesting that he went to this particular community because it's full of other Origins as well. So it's the idea that somehow he knew she would end up there. That to me is still kind of like, I know, what is it? Yucca, I think, is somehow drawn Origins there. So maybe he felt she would go there, but who's to say she would have gotten there in time? But I'm surprised he wasn't kind of looking at, maybe there's some other folks around that I could train, Right. But I do think that he felt like he did have a lot more trust in her than anything. And I appreciated that.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm curious to know whether there is some kind of like preordained thing within this world. Everyone talks about, a lot of times in fantasy, there's this idea of a prophecy. Like when you have one character who's supposedly destined to do something, it's because of some prophecy. So I wonder how much of this world is based in that, and that he knows that Essun maybe doesn't know. Because we all have to remember too, Alabaster was like top level, like Origin. He was like king of kings. It feels like, at the very least, whether or not he was, is beside the point. Like, he felt like he was king of kings of the Origins. And so how likely is it that he believed that because this was what he thought needed to be done, that it was some kind of a prophecy? Is it written somewhere or seen somehow, like there's something that he was shown that then he's like, this is exactly how it is, which is why maybe they go to this particular community? Like, is everything she had to go through in the Obelisk Gate then therefore something that she had to learn? Did he know about all these other things? Because he seems to know quite a bit of the fact that Essun is somehow supposed to be the one to make everything right again.
See, I kind of felt that too, because he has antimony, and the Stone Eaters, some of the questions surrounding them were answered, but then there's still a lot that was not answered. And they are, I mean, essentially can't be killed. They've been here since like the beginning of time. And I feel like that they have a lot of insight into what goes on. And I think maybe it's the idea that antimony is, in his corner that maybe helps with that.
That's what I'm wondering. It has a kind of feel, if anyone's read the Stormbringer, or the Stormlight Archive, I mean, by Brandon Sanderson, the, oh crap, what are they called? The little wisps, or like Syl and Pattern, those characters, if you're familiar with them, basically they almost feel like they're fairies, but they're not fairies. They're something much more complex than that. But it felt very similar in that sense, where like they are characters that seem to be pretty all-knowing, incredibly powerful, have some kind of agenda in a sense. But I wonder how antimony plays into all of this, because we also know Hoa is a character who is much bigger than he seems in terms of this world. And we see another character who is similar to him that also brings in another character, which we'll talk about in a minute. So like there's a lot here that I wonder if it's been prophesized and nobody's talking about it, because nobody has brought up the idea that it's a prophecy of any kind. But it has a very strong feel to that for me.
So. I feel like the whole book kind of has that. Like, even when you were talking about in the first book about like how it's written, like it's her from the future, kind of like she's all knowing. And you know how in the Bible certain things are prophesized, like they speak before the First Testament or the New Testament. It speaks about, like, I don't want to get into all that. I'm not like deeply religious, but it's the idea that, some things are prophesized and spoken about of, remember we said this 1,000 years before. I kind of felt like this book almost had that same feel to it. And I got that more, or maybe I was paying attention more in this particular book than I did in the 5th season, about how it was written.
Right. And it's interesting, too, how a lot of that more comes into play, because we did talk about, too, in the 5th season, how the beginning, the prologue, felt very biblical in a lot of ways, because the way that now we know Alabaster being the one starting the 5th season, how it felt like that parting of the Red Sea, how it felt like that very powerful biblical moment that changes the way that the world is and basically starts the ending of the world. And so it's very interesting how, like you said, this kind of biblical almost feel of the prophecies, saying things are going to be, happening later on, like how that's still tying in. And I would not be surprised if in book 3 we do see something get brought up about a possible prophecy, or if at the very least we see some kind of future in terms of this world where things are going to be righted and we get to see some kind of look into what the world will look like after everything has happened, whether good or bad, if things don't get righted.
That just reminded me of something. So back when, I forgot who was talking about it. I know Essun was talking about wanting to be a lorist and stuff, which are kind of like historians. And they were talking about, maybe it was somebody else, but talking about how back in the day, I guess, when people believed in lorists and all, things were written in stone. And then they said there was something about 3 that were potentially left and all were broken before. So that's another type of potentially maybe something has been prophesized.
It's entirely possible. I mean, this is all, theorizing at this point, but very interesting information that I think we'll need to keep our eyes on with book 3. So, only able to ask for help because it was Essun. She has absolutely proven her loyalty to him, regardless of how things ended in the 5th season. Absolutely. I think that's why he trusts her in particular. Like, there's no other, he would not be able to do anything without Essun. And I think he realizes that. And that's why he chose her to handle things as opposed to anybody else. Alabaster does have an education that other Origins don't usually have. He was able to read very old history books at the Fulcrum, and eventually he became his own teacher. Exactly my point. I think that he knew a lot more of what was really going on, and therefore had more information about who was likely to fix things if he was not to. I think we knew in 5th season, Obelisk Gate confirmed it for us. There's a reason why he was insistent on training her in the 5th season. Felt a desperation or intent behind the training. Yes. I think he knew. I think he knew 100%, even if he also knew that eventually he was going to die in some capacity. He knew something was up. And so he either knows some kind of a prophecy or some kind of a plan. And he knows that this person is like, pardon the phrasing and all, but maybe as soon as the new Jesus Christ, in a sense, in this world, where she is going to save everybody and redeem them for the past mistakes and die for their mistakes and die for their issues and all those things. Like, I would not be surprised. I really wouldn't. I feel like at this point she's kind of proven that that's kind of the way things are going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Oscar. Did you go on a walk, buddy? And no.
You went right back out.
Yep, pretty much. Okay, hi, bye. Hi, Jura. Hello.
How you doing?
Can't wait to find out what the Obelisk Gates really are and what the moon has to do with everything. We were kind of talking on that. We were kind of just discussing that. So we were theorizing the idea that essentially Alabaster may have known something in terms of, like, he knew of a prophecy of some kind, which is why he brought Essun into everything. And the obelisks are like kind of that beginning point of where a lot of this world was built, because it is talked about how the world started off with these obelisks, and when the moon basically malfunctioned in some point, in some way, and it threw the moon out of orbit. And the whole reason that Alabaster brought in Essun in the first place was because he believes that she is going to be able to bring the moon back into orbit and save the world, essentially. Because apparently part of what's happened in this world is that there's like this winter that just is devastating, which I believe is that kind of ending of the world, that reset of that entire world. Very reminiscent to me of Game of Thrones, with the long winters that would go on in that world, where like everyone's scared of when winter comes because bad things tend to happen. So yeah, we've been just sitting here theorizing about a lot of that. So the next thing I do want to talk about, though, in terms of Essun's line of story, before we move on to anybody else, is the infighting that there was within the comms. Essun might have to save, I feel like her daughter is the one to destroy the world for the last time. Again, another thing we're going to touch on later about the daughter, because that's a whole other can of worms I'm excited to know more about. So let's talk about the infighting within all of the communities. So it has been no secret to us since the 5th season that the Origins are considered like bad. They are considered evil because they have magic abilities. They can hurt people. And they are looked at as lesser than, also in that same regard. They are all sent away to the Fulcrum to basically be used for the world's purposes as, laborers, in a sense, if you will, where they are the ones taking charge of taking care of the world and the empires and all that stuff. Within that, though, there are communities of Origins where there is some othering of certain people that are thought of as less than, whether it's because they have less resources than others or less money or whatever the case may be. And we saw in the Obelisk Gate, there was an issue with a couple of comms where the one that Essun was a part of in Castrima was being attacked by another comm from Rhaenys, I think is how you say the name. And we were seeing a lot of back and forth about how one was better than the other, and they were looking to kill each other off, basically, in order to, I don't know, take control of other resources, other things, essentially just an all-out war for themselves. And I think that this is one of the first times Essun really got to see a lot of that, because she, from what I understand, only saw so much of that othering nature, and not in the sense of an entire community of people that are the same doing that. I feel like anytime she's seen any kind of othering, it's been people othering her and saying she is something to fear, something to do away with. And that extends to then her husband, with when he kills their son, and how she has to go find her daughter, thinking that her daughter is now also in danger. So I want to talk about this kind of otheringness that is within this marginalized group of people already. How does that affect the world? What do we think is really the biggest thing in terms of that? Because there's always a reason people are fighting for different things, right? They're fighting for resources, whatever the case may be. So what are our thoughts in terms of that whole thing? What does that do in this world? How does that help? How does it hinder? I kind of want to get everybody's thoughts on that. Courtney, do you want to say anything on it?
I think that, excuse me, I think that overall everybody's trying to survive. So between Castrima and Renes's, I'm gonna just call them Rennies. Between them, I think there's just looking for survival, because everybody's going into this 5th season and they want just what is going to help them last out the longest. So I think between them, that is that overwhelming, we need to survival of the fittest, if you will. And I think that when it's within the community, I think there's a lot of mistrust. I think that there's just a lot of, I think, history of people just not, you know how when you have certain, like as far as with the origins, right? It's been talked about forever. Like they even talk about in the back of like each chapter about how people have been taught since birth to basically view the origins as inferior people, you know, and maybe that comes from because they, you know, created these obelisks and, you know, destroyed stuff, or, you know, and because they're dangerous, but people have been taught to fear them and marginalize them since the beginning. And that continued. I think when it came to Castrima, the fact that they were all able to, for a time, live together, at least to squash some of those differences, because they all had issues with each other, but they were able to squash it. But of course, in times of strife, like when the Rennies came and was like, hey, look, we can merge, but we don't want the origins here. You know, I think that's when those differences come to a head, and pretty much people are looking at survival yet again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's the way that I took it overall. Just people are just trying to look out for their own best interest. And even with the origins, that was kind of like I don't know as necessarily I would say that it was a hierarchy, but in the end, they were trying to band together, even though Essun was like, hey, it's no point in these people moving rocks. They can't even do that. But she was still looking out for them, because she knows in the end, these are my people. Mm-hmm. Of anybody else, everybody looks down upon me. I don't care how weak in the hierarchy, if you will, of the origins. These are my people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to talk about. What do people do in terms of survival? The lengths that people, in general, like in our world, the lengths that people will go to survive through natural disaster, poverty, anything like that. There is something to be said, though, about a group that feels the need to bring down another group as opposed to bringing up everyone. Because it could have been as simple as merging, but the Rennies did decide that they thought the origins were not welcome. So why is it that you can, you know, have the need to just completely oust an entire group, as opposed to having some power, having something that would actually make it better? it may just be completely, you know, a lack of resources in terms of maybe food. Maybe they were afraid that it was going to be too much in terms of food, you know, for each person. Maybe if the origins needed more food than others to sustain their powers, you know, whatever the case may be. But it's very interesting how in this book we see a lot of different ways in which survival is incredibly important. We see it with the comms. We see it with, in some ways, Alabaster, with him having to train Essun and feeling a need to train her to allow the human race to survive, essentially. And we even see it with Nasun, where she's trying to survive her own father. And we see it with the Stone Eaters trying to save everybody and protect and, you know, protect the obelisks and all that stuff. It's just interesting how that seems to be one of the biggest themes in this entire book, is this idea of survival. Whereas in the first book, I think a huge theme was about the oppressive nature of human beings, how we can take an entire community of people and just shove them away and think that that's where they're going to stay. And that's not always the case.
And then I think also there was manipulation within that too. So while they're looking to survive, you still have the idea that we're willing to sacrifice an entire population for that. Like take the Castrima and the Rennies, right? So the Rennies said, hey, look, we don't want the origins, right? But then when Essun went to pretty much tell them no dice, we're not going to negotiate, you know, they were very honest, which I appreciated. I liked how honest they were. Oh, well, you know, we pretty much don't want any of y'all anyway. We just felt like y'all would fight amongst yourselves about that and kill each other, and we can just waltz in, you know? So they were willing to manipulate in order to get what they wanted in the end, you know, because, you know, they're just like, hey, you know, we're going to do what we want. You know, we know all the strongholds and everything, so we don't really need y'all, you know, we want the community, but I don't even know that, you know, they think that much of that either.
Right. Well, and it's interesting too, because I wonder how much the geode in Castrima has to do with an abundance of resources, because those of you that didn't catch it, Castrima basically is entirely run by a geode that has this power. And that's where, you know, a lot of the magic is kind of coming from for this area. And so it's obviously a very valuable resource for, you know, especially the origins. And one of the things that we see is that in this huge war that breaks out, where the Rennies try to come in and infiltrate the Castrima population, you know, Essun feels called to protect. And so in order to protect, she ends up accidentally destroying the actual source of power that is going to help this community, and basically makes it a barren wasteland at that point. And then at that point, after having killed all of the Rennies, she's like, all right, well, let's go take over where they were, because now it's just completely open. And maybe there's something there for us, because there's obviously nothing here. And again, it is interesting to see how far people will go to try to survive a situation where they are backed up against a wall. And I think in this one, we see that more so with Essun, where she's feeling like she's getting blocked off from every angle. She can't go find her daughter anymore. She's getting roped into this thing with Alabaster that she thinks she has to do because, you know, she wants to help him because she cares about him, but then also it could help save the world and save her family and everyone else that she may care about. And, you know, she has a calling to help the people in this community that took her in, gave her the ability to, you know, have a place to stay and, you know, shelter her as she's been traveling. So it's just so interesting how, particularly in Essun's story, we see so much about this need for survival in multiple formats. So with that, I kind of want to transition now to the story of Hoa, which we don't get a ton about, but we get enough understanding of why he's been around this entire time. Those of you that may remember, in the 5th season, Hoa was this little itty bitty boy who just all of a sudden started going along with Essun on their journey, and we found out he's a stone eater and he's a very powerful one. And he's basically following her because he thinks he has to protect her in a lot of ways. And he just kind of grew a shining to her, which I think is super adorable. Because every time I think about him, I think of this little itty bitty stone boy that thinks that he's like just as powerful as all the big ones, but he's really not. That's probably not at all what it is
The
in
diamond
terms of
teeth.
like, yeah, like, and just having like the itty bitty little teeth and just being like, I'm gonna go save everybody, but I'm this tiny little itty bitty boy. Like, for some reason, that's the image that comes into my head. I don't know why. That's probably not even close to what he actually is. That's just, it's always been funny to me since he started off as that little kid. So, what I want to talk about with him is the fact that in this world, we've learned that the Stone Eaters are obviously incredibly old. We're going to talk a little bit about the world building and the magic within this world now. Hoa is kind of this character that really helps us understand more about that idea of the prophecy, I think, in terms of what Alabaster might have been going for, what he may have known that we are slowly starting to learn about and may learn more about in the Stone Sky. So Hoa is very much a representation, I think, by himself as this magic is building, this world is getting built up. So what do we really think is Hoa's main goal? Because it doesn't seem like he has too much of one, but obviously we see more in this one that he does. What do we think his main goal in this book is, besides just walking around with Essun?
I think that he knows definitely more than he's knowing. And maybe he knows, like you said, the prophecy there, because he was part of something before, since he was, in the Garnet?
Mm-hmm.
Was it the Garnet's one? Yeah. In the Garnet Obelisk. But I think that he's definitely a protector. In my opinion, I think the Stone Eaters attach themselves to an origin. And for some reason, I guess in order to, I don't know, I think somehow they go hand in hand, because look at Antimony and Alabaster, and then you have Hoa that somehow became attracted to Essun. But I feel like he's a protector. But what I thought was really, really interesting, and also think they're a source to draw power from as well, because not only is she drawing power or utilizing the obelisk, but I think Hoa is probably also a source of power as well, as in addition to a protector. But what I thought was interesting when she asked him, why me? Why are you, follow me around? And he goes, because you asked me if I was okay when she drew up the obelisk in Aaliyah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really cool. And, I like to draw analogies between things because that's just how my brain works. I started thinking about that Oprah interview with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle when the reporter asked her, are you okay? Because when she was talking about it, because she said, up until that point, nobody ever asked me if I was okay. Anyway, that's a side point, but that's exactly what I thought in that scene. Yeah. And I thought it was beautiful. I almost shed a tear. Didn't, but almost. I was like, oh.
Yeah. Well, and I think Hoa brings to light a really important thing where even the most stone-like, pardon the pun, of people, there's something to be said about how they could just be withering on the inside as much as anyone else. And it's always the strongest people in our lives that are hurting the most. And if we think about it, right, the Stone Eaters, yeah, they're strong. They've got magic. They've been a part of the world for God knows how long. But they obviously are hurting too. They're confused. They're lost. They're attaching themselves to these human people because they don't know what else to do. They just think, oh, I like this one. I'm going to follow this one. Just like how when you find friends when you're a kid, you're just like, I picked this one. This one's my favorite. I'm going to stick with this one my entire life. Like, that is kind of the thing that it got brought up for me, where it's like, it's interesting how in our lives, we all find people that we find to draw strength from, even if we are strong ourselves or make the appearance that we're strong. Because obviously the Stone Eaters, they can't do much without the origins, and they can't put things right without the origins and without Essun in particular. And I just really appreciate, again, how Hoa has that very childlike kind of personality, where Esun has that mothering tendencies that she's always had, besides the fact that she's an actual mother. And like they mesh well together. They work well together because Hoa respects her, and he's like, I like you. You actually took care of me. You, even before you knew I was a stone eater, you saved me. You protected me when I was hurt. Nobody else would have done that. But you, even though you were grieving, took care of me. And that speaks volumes to somebody who believes that they are so strong and can face anything, but is able to be vulnerable with somebody that they can trust and be able to then rely on that person. But I think in some ways too, it becomes a bit of a crutch, where there's the other side to the sword, where, you know, you can rely on that person, but the second that they falter, it's going to feel at first like your world's crashing down. And I just really like the way that, you know, we kind of see Hoa talk about some of that, you know, journey that he's had with Esun, because I think we get to see more of her through somebody else's eyes for the first time, because everything we've seen so far has been her perspective. It was just very, very interesting to me.
I like how he said that about how she took care of him and everything too. But I also think that he appeared as a kid, because that would have been easier. It's easier to attract, or it's easier to attach yourself to a kid when you're meeting someone new and feel compassion and go along with stuff than as an adult. Because keep in mind, you know, she basically has been ousted and is leaving this community and traveling, and they're about to go into this devastating season. So it's easier when you can't really trust anybody, because now everybody's kind of for themselves, and people become bandits, and they're about to start, you know, getting together in these groups and raiding everybody. So if you see this kid, it's easier to be like, okay, I'm attaching myself to this kid. So I think that was an easier form for him to take in order for her to be able to accept him for what he was. But I feel like, because she was grieving her kid as well. So it's not just the fact that he's a kid, which is more vulnerable and you're more likely to take care of a kid, but she's also grieving. I mean, she's lost 3 kids by now. So it's like, you know, she's not going to refuse another one. But I do like that. I feel like he's almost become a man. I know it's different because he's kind of changed into his normal form, but I felt like he grew up in this book. So that was kind of the idea that I saw when he came up, and she was like, "Oh, that's how his voice
right."
She's looking different.
I thought that was so interesting too. And you're 100% right. He definitely took on that form to make her more comfortable. I mean, we learned that. I think he even in some ways says it at one point. And I think that it's a really smart that he decided to do that. But I still just think that it's so interesting to be able to see that, you know, she, without even realizing that he was a stone eater in the first place, she's just like, this one I have to take care of.
Yeah.
You're 100% right. I think that, you know, with grieving her own children, she just knew she had to like keep this one safe. And then because of that, he was like, okay, I can trust her. I'm going to attach myself to her now. Like, she decided to take care of me. I'm going to take care of her. And you're 100% right too. He grew up so much in this book. And I think it's interesting too, because it's like just as if like her own kid was to have grown up, you know, that mom where she's like, oh my God, my kid is a teenager now. How is that possible? They're making their own decisions. You know, it's so odd. It's so weird, but it's also so awesome to see. And like, you have that proud mom moment kind of thing. Like, it's just fascinating, that whole relationship with them.
And I knew that was always in him, because he said he's older than, you know, he seems. It's just the idea, it gives you that idea that she had a kid that grew up, even though, you know, it really wasn't the case. But yeah, I thought that was really cool.
It's kind of sad though, too, because it makes you kind of realize she didn't get to see that with her own kids.
Yep.
And that kind of hurts.
Yeah.
Because she had to give one up to be killed. She had to kill one of her own children to protect him. She lost another one by her own husband, who killed him. And her daughter, she has no idea where she is. So she might as well consider her dead in some ways.
It's like she's getting another chance with Hoa.
Right. And she's actually able to experience having and raising a child in some way, even if he's fully capable of doing that himself. Each time the world is broken, it needs to be remade. History and political structures are lost. It's easier to control with a hierarchy. You can't question leadership if you're fighting your brethren. 100%. I think that this is like one of the biggest things in terms of the comms is and why they fight with each other is that if you can control another group, you have the power. And I think that when you especially take that power by force, people listen. I mean, look at what all of history, right? History is nothing but groups conquering other groups. And that is how history continues in some ways than others. Welcome, Maya. Thank you for joining. You're totally fine. I appreciate the support. If we spoil anything for you, I do apologize. We are just talking about the Obelisk Gate itself, so hopefully nothing too much gets spoiled for you. But remember, the Stone Eaters were once human. Did they sacrifice their human self in an attempt to save the world? Yes.
That's what I think too.
Yeah, and I think that's the same, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Jira. Hoa just wants to protect Essun. Yep. Also significance in our main character settling on Essun as her identity. Yeah, and I think we kind of talked about that in the 5th season, like why she's stuck with Essun. And I think it's just like she's molded, like, because we talked about how she went from Demaya as a child to Cyanite as more of that, like, kind of young adult, getting into her, space, and then Essun as a fully grown adult. And, like, I think that that's kind of like the final form, if you will, or who the heck knows? Maybe whatever happens in the Stone Sky, she turns into a completely different person again. That could also be the case. But yes, so in terms of the Stone Eaters, I think that is likely the case because they are so human-like in so many ways. I would be willing to bet that they were originally groups of people who lived on this earth and enveloped themselves in some kind of magic that turned them into this and turned the obelisks into what they are.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Because in that, I don't know, people should have read it already. But in the end, there is something that turns that leads you to believe certain things. And look at Alabaster as well. Like, look at his transformation. I'm trying to be vague. His transformation you see in the end with the comment that they made. So, yes, I agree. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I think that has something interesting to then look into later because I'm just going to say it. For those of you that didn't read it, I'm sorry, but we talked about it at the beginning of this. We're going to be talking about spoilers in terms of the second book. So I apologize. Feel free to mute me if you need to. But Alabaster turning to stone over the course of this book leads me to believe the Stone Eaters very easily could have been human. And let's say thousands of years pass. They can reform themselves. Maybe they don't stay like as stoned in one place, but they become the stone people, the Stone Eaters after some time. And that is compounded by the amount of magic that those stones take in with the obelisks and all that. So I don't know. I mean, we don't know much about the world before the world that we know currently. We've learned some things in terms of the fact that Alabaster talks about how the world kind of became a little bit more desolate than it used to be, but we don't really know much of how the obelisk got there, how the Stone Eaters were turned fully into like these, like if they were human at one point. I think this may be more things that we're going to learn more about in Stone Sky because they weren't really brought up much in the first book. The second book, I think, Obelisk Gate really brought in some good answers, but even more questions, as a second book in a series should, to propel one to go to the final book.
Yeah. I think that the Stone Eaters, like they talked about how people change over time, you know, and the longer you're on this earth, the more that you change. And some stone eaters are a little bit more human lifelike, if you will, than others.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then Asun even talked about how, you know, how Hoa was talking about some stone eaters been on this earth, whatever, and then there's some that are younger, and she was guessing is he might maybe a weaker stone eater because, like, even though he's older, maybe he's still younger than the one that attacked him. So I think that maybe the longer they're alive or on this earth, I guess that the more stiff and stone they get. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm all with that whole stone eaters or previous people. Are they origins all turning into that? I don't know, because I guess the last book will kind of hopefully discuss of why you had origins to begin with. I'm hoping it goes into that. Like, I'm assuming we were all people at one point, and then some sort of deviation into creating origini.
Yeah, that's usually the case in a lot of fantasy or any kind of superhero based thing in any world. Is like there's usually something that happens that is a catalyst to so many people all of a sudden having this ability, or certain people having this ability. So I think we'll learn much more about that in book 3. Think she's Esun because she has living children as Esun. Yeah, that could be why she's staying as that, because it's an identity that her children would know, so she stays like that. Favorite character is Nasun. Remember, Stone Eater visited her while she was traveling with Shafa. I wonder if it was Hoa. Well, they went by a different name if it is the case, but that is an interesting segue into my next point. But I'm going to go through some comments real quick before we hit that one. And yes, Esun is now turning to stone. This is 100% true. So how quick is this going to happen? Because Alabaster, it seemed, was pretty quick. So we might not have much time. I did say during our book 1 discussion that Esun is the obelisk. I'm going to hold on to that. I'm willing to bet you might be right in some way. I think going back to the idea that Alabaster knew some kind of prophecy in terms of Esun's purpose, this might be something to think about later on. So, with that, let's talk about, I think what Courtney was really interested in is about Shafa, and in particular, Nasun's story. So, for those of you that do not know or did not read the book for whatever reason, Nasun is Esun's eldest daughter. She is also an origin. And in the first book, we learn that Nasun has been taken away by her father, Jija, who then also killed her younger brother, Uche. Now, the reason he killed Uche is because he basically found out that Uche was an origin, hated it, didn't want anything to do with that, so he killed him out of self-preservation. Now, he doesn't necessarily 100% think that Nasun is also dangerous, but he thinks that since he killed Uche, it might have been a mistake, and he's going to try to see if he can cure Nasun. So he takes her to a place that essentially will try to cure her of her origin-ness. And in those travels, we see Jija's perspective in some cases, but mostly from Nasun's perspective, as she is basically trying to protect herself and not showcase her powers to protect herself from her father. And within that, we actually get her to meet Shafa, who, those of you may remember, Shafa was also the guardian that picked up Esun when she was still under the name of Damaya at the very beginning of the 5th season. So he's still around, he's still alive and kicking, and he believes that Nasun is also destined for great things. Now, here's something I found very confusing with him, and was one of the reasons I didn't feel like he was necessary. He loses his memory partway through, and all of a sudden, this one event happens where then all of a sudden he's like, oh, wait, I remember everything. What was the point in that? I don't know. That just threw me for a bit of a loop, but nonetheless, he finds Nasun. He believes that she is super powerful and is looking to use her for his own means. Whether that means getting back at Esun, we don't know at this point. And she meets another stone eater, which Jira also pointed out, who goes by the name of Steel. Now it is a different name, but it very well could be Hoa. We don't really know. I don't know whether or not these people can move faster than others, even if they're stone. We don't really know. But then this stone eater attaches itself to Nasun and it says, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to help you on your journey because I think you might need some help. So we learn too within that the Nasun is also now on the path of trying to bring the moon back into orbit. Mm-hmm. So we've got mother and we've got daughter vying for the same goal, but are they for the right reasons, each person? We don't know. We don't know what Nasun's end game will be within that. And what I'm curious to know, are we going to see a battle between mom and daughter? Because that is the way I feel like this is heading. And if that is the case, I am going to be so sad probably by the end of this, because more than likely, this is just me theorizing at this point. I am scared that Esun is going to sacrifice herself so she doesn't have to kill her own baby again. I'm terrified of that. I'm also terrified of Nasun even dying in the first place because she's still so young. Courtney, what are your thoughts on the entire idea of Nasun having a perspective, all of that?
I liked that they gave her a perspective. I appreciated that she was so young, but she had all the powers of like a four-ringer. So that was pretty interesting. But that also is homage to her mother training her well. So she started from a much better place than a lot of other people. But I do think that she is going to have a very important role. I think that she is young. You can see a lot of that youngness in how she thinks about stuff. And also in the way I think she is potentially being manipulated. I don't think still is Hoa. I think Hoa did mention something about, you have the stone eaters out there, but we don't always have the same, what did he say? Like they don't all have the same agenda. He did mention that. And so I think that and he was saying that was it Alabaster? They said basically that there are some people that would like to have the moon back, but it's not really for the same purpose. So I think it is going to be pitted Esun against Nasun with their stone eaters for different reasons. Now, how that all plays out, I don't know. Or maybe the stone eater with steel steel that's with Nasun, maybe they're just saying that they want the moon back, but because it sounds good and maybe not. So I don't know. I think it's interesting. I'm interested to see how it all plays out. Shafa, that's a whole nother ball game. I'm still trying to decide if he's a good guy or a bad guy. Because keep in mind, right? So are we going to talk about Shafa or should I hold off on that?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So Nasun, like I said, I think she's coming into her ability. She's learning. She's doing some stuff. She's going to be a badass. I think we all see that. So that's why, to me, she's kind of cut and dry, but I think she's been manipulated. So Shafa was basically going to die. Now, he said it's hard for guardians to die, but he was going to die. Something happened with him in the water where he said he had to make a choice. He made some sort of choice. Yes, he lost his memory, but he's fighting against something. Maybe it's Father Earth, which basically wants to kill people, and maybe he gave him another chance. I'm still trying to wrestle in my head exactly what Shafa's purpose is, because Shafa was all about the Guardians before and oppressing the Origines for their own benefit. However, it seems like he's kind of changed his mind and had a new leaf, and that's giving him pain because I think he's going against Father Earth and the silver and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? So I'm concerned about who is he, somebody that's going to be good or not, and if Nasun should trust him. And also their little relationships, like somebody just said, and Alisa said, gives the creeps. I feel like there's a pedophilia aspect in my head. Now I know he's not, but I just feel that with all the hugging and I love you, and I'm just like,
I felt the same way though when Esun was younger. I felt the same kind of vibe. So you're not the only one.
I thought she was going to grow up. Like, I don't know what the timeline of the next book and how everything progresses. But let's say she grows up as an adult. I kind of feel like this better not take a turn to where now they're lovers. You know, if this is like a 5-10 years. No, she's 11. I'm just saying, either way, I'm going to be like,
yeah.
But I did like how he laid down the law with Jiha. And
and what's interesting is I'm kind of interested to see if it does turn into something where they have a relationship, because that puts an even worse light on Shafa in the fact that he's a groomer.
Yeah.
And if he especially manipulates Nasun, how does that affect the way that she then sees her mother? How does that affect the way that if they do come against each other, that whole thing blows up? It's not necessarily something I would condone by any means, but I do wonder if that is going to be something we're going to see where they have a relationship, and that is so that he can manipulate her further to kind of go against Father Earth or do whatever it is that he wants to do, which I think you might be right. He may have gone against Father Earth, which is why some like things happen the way they did. But want to know who put the thing in Shafa's head? Probably gonna get answered honestly in the Stone Sky. We'll probably learn more about that. Hi Adrian, welcome.
Hello. How you doing?
Got groomer vibes all over 15.
Yeah, there you go. Yes.
Yep, I agree with that. I think that while at the time that I had my vlog and read the Obelisk Gate, I didn't quite understand Shafa, his entire perspective. I did see it in terms of building on Nasun. I just didn't see the point in the whole memory loss thing. I feel like that wasn't really necessary. Like, he still could have made a decision whether or not he lost his memory in my mind, but maybe that's just me.
I felt like his memory loss thing was so that he's starting with a blank slate, because something happened with him in the water where he made some sort of decision. I'm still trying to figure that out, like I said. But if he made some decision and he's slow, like I felt like he got his memory back, but he's still slowly struggling to get some of them. So I don't think it's all there. But I think that he's battling against, I think, his previous self. Mm-hmm. And so I think the whole memory loss is so that he can have that internal battle. But I think, like we said, this is kind of like a filler book. So I think it's the idea, his role is so that when in the third book, I'm assuming we meet back up with Esun and all together, then you have that element of you're with my daughter, because several times Esun was like, I hate that guy, basically, when she was referring back to him, like, oh, him again, you know?
Right. And I think, too, that seeing him with Nasun is going to be really interesting because, again, like you said, like Esun's been very back and forth with him, doesn't know whether to trust him, whether to believe him. So now seeing him with her daughter in whatever capacity, obviously that's going to cause some massive damage. So I think that's going to be incredibly interesting, because I think that everything at this point, while this was a filler book, it's definitely created some really good theories and really good ideas of what to be looking for in book 3. Pace-wise, I just feel like this was not where I wanted it to be. I think, like we said at the very beginning, this was something where it was very, very slow for a lot of it, and then a lot of action picked up at the very end, and now it's like, where do we go from here? And that's not necessarily bad, but that seems to be the case with a lot of second books. And so my hope going into the final book is not only for there to be a big bad ending, but also I want to know more, like we were talking about before, about the magic. I want to know more about the obelisks. I want to know more about how all this started. I am hoping that we have Esun kind of have that moment where, like, everything's revealed, like the stereotypical scene of things when, like, everyone's seen, like, the Big Bang and, like, all the stars and the galaxies and learning all the things about the universe. Like, I hope that we get one of those kinds of moments, because I think that we need it. We need to understand, how did everything get to this point? What is the mythology in this world that led us to this point? And why is it Esun in particular? What is it about her that changes everything? Because I think while Alabaster, like, touched on it. I still don't understand what it is about Essun in particular. Like, obviously she's very powerful, but how is she more powerful than Alabaster, who was at the top of his game when she got with him? How is it that she's different? Because I don't see it right now. And I think it's because she's so focused on other things.
I think part of it, though, is that, like, with Alabaster, he had already, coming into the book, had learned everything, so there's not much more that you can teach him. And he was kind of set in his ways. But then you have Essun, who basically started as the Maya as a blank slate. And she's continuing to learn. So you have that evolution of her. So I think that's what makes her a lot more important than Alabaster. Like, he's one to gain knowledge from, but how much more extra knowledge can he impart? Like, to make the story interesting when he's not going to really change,
Yeah. Interestingly enough, so I want to pose a question. I want everyone to answer in the comments what they think this answer will be if we see it in the Stone Sky. Do you think that Nassun is going to prove to be stronger than her mother Essun? Because let's think about this, right? We learned that Nassun has learned some things from Essun, who, when going into learning about her orogenic powers, was basically, by the time she went to the fulcrum, she was at, I think, it pretty much Nassun's age. She was around that age when she first started learning how to use her powers. And because her daughter has more under her belt, do we think that therefore is going to make it so that Nassun's going to be stronger than Essun?
I think that they'll be evenly matched to a certain extent, but I don't think she'll ever really be stronger, because I think that unless Shafa imparts more knowledge, I think Essun definitely has learned a whole lot more. For one, she has lived experiences, but also she's learned from, the best of the best there. Mm-hmm. But also, I always think you always have mama knows best. But I also wanted to have a go back to, you said something about Shafa, right? About why Shafa, I think, is important.
Yeah.
So Jihad dies, right, at the book. So Essun has all this rage that she's waiting, like, I can't grieve until basically I get my daughter back and kill Jihad, right? So that anger that she has, it has to go somewhere else. Like, granted, she's probably going to have some sort of battle with her daughter. I believe that's coming up somewhere. But she has to also have some other outlet to direct that at, and she has lost Jihad as a possibility for that. So I think Shafa is another outlet for that, and that's part of why his role was brought up again.
Do we think that it's going to be the same kind of outlet, in the sense that, so some people, for instance, when they have anger and frustration, they take it out on one person in one way. Do we think it's going to be the same way with Shafa as it was with Jija?
I think it may actually be more, because with Jia, it's just the idea that you killed my kid, right? And then you took my other one. I think with Shafa, it's the idea of how he's manipulated her basically her entire life. And then also he was the reason why she wound up killing her kid. And then, well, I guess he didn't have anything to do with the when she was at Terimo, but I just think she has these lived experiences and all this trauma that has built up. But a lot of it started when, he took her to the fulcrum. And then the idea that now you have my daughter, and you're teaching her stuff. So I think that is going to be a combination of all of those things. But I'm still trying to figure out kind of where I'm interested to see what his role is, because I feel like he was like the bad guy. I mean, we learned something about Guardians, not a whole lot, but a lot in book 2. But he seemed like he's kind of repented in some of his ways and said, I was wrong in training this way and all this other stuff. So I'm trying to figure out if he's going to try to be a good guy in the last book.
I think that's kind of the point, though. To make him that uneasy is it's another thing that propels us to understand what's going on, really. So I think that honestly, I think that as much as I didn't care for him at first within this, I do see by the end of this book, I see where N.K. Jemisin's going with him. And so I would really like to see as well what exactly he does turn out to be, whether it's a good guy or a bad guy.
Yeah.
Felt the same way. Need a few more things fleshed out. Yep, 100%. We better pay attention to this book. There have been 2 snowstorms in California. Earth is trying to give us warnings. Yeah, we up here in Michigan, yesterday we just had like a really bad snowstorm, and I'll tell you, it was so funny. This morning it was like a foot of snow. People were slipping and sliding all over. By about noon today, half of it was melted. Like, it was ridiculous. So I think that's right. You got to pay attention. Elise's think Natsun's going to end up being more powerful than Esun.
She may be. Look how young she is, and she's already wielding. I think it depends on how. I don't know the time frame that's going to happen. You know, for all we know, it's going to take. Truthfully, I don't think, because she already knows she's up north, so I don't think it's going to take that long for her to find her. So I don't know. We'll see.
It depends, I guess, on how much Shafa thinks he needs to teach her. Because if he thinks he needs to teach her more, and I wonder too, because another thing that they didn't really talk about much, well, I guess because it didn't really have a chance, is that there was the whole thing in the first season when we learned about the Guardians, how they have that mental connection with the Origins. Is he going to be somebody who's going to use that to his ability? Is he going to place some kind of fear in her, just like he did with Esun? And how is she going to respond to that? Is she going to respond in the same exact way? Because she's already felt that with her dad. How much worse can it get? She was afraid every single second of her life with her father.
And then what happens when Nasun finds out that Shafa was the guardian over her mother, because she already feels like the fulcrum, basically is a horrible place, and it, took her mother from her, and her mother's mean, and she thinks that Shafa is the whole world. So I wonder when she realizes that he was she already knows that he used to teach at the fulcrum, so she's already forgiven him for that. But the idea that the teachings that he taught her mother is the teachings that her mother imparted for her, which were harsh, and that's the reason why she thinks her mother doesn't love her. Mm-hmm. But it's the idea that Shafa was the one that taught her that. Mm-hmm. So I feel like he's kind of living a double life in the heads of mother and daughter. Yeah.
No kidding. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, Courtney, do you have any final thoughts in terms of the Obelisk Gate and the Broken Earth trilogy so far before we end this live show and answer anything that people may have in terms of questions?
Let's see. I'm looking at my little crazy notes here.
Shafa was groomed just like he groomed others. That's why I want to know who put that thing in his head. Yes, I think you're right. I think he definitely had been groomed to some extent. And maybe that's why he becomes a groomer. Let's see.
I just have a note that said something about sense of community. Like and I was comparing this in my head, the sense of found community between Esun and Nasun, because you have Esun, who went to Castrima, where everybody, at least on the surface, is attempting to get along so she can actually be herself. And that's something that she never really had before outside of the fulcrum, because everybody's afraid of origins. So you have Esun that was able to get into this community, and it was 6 months she was getting comfortable, getting involved. But of course, it's just like Moab or Moab or whatever, it won't last. But then you also have Nasun, who goes to Found Moon, and she is able to be in a community of people that are like her. And so I thought it was really interesting just comparing the idea that they're both able to be themselves in these communities that they found, but neither one of them, I think, are destined to last. And I think that, to me, is one of them overwhelming things I get throughout the first 2 books, is that they're part of all these communities that are temporary.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because I think to some extent, people that move into new areas believe that it's temporary. If you're a kid who is uprooted, for instance, and moved to a brand new city with your family, are you actually able to think that this is where you're going to be for the rest of your life? That just because you move the one time, that's where you're staying? I don't think so. I think most kids, they get really nervous moving the first time because it's like, am I going to end up picking up my life and moving again? I know as a grown adult, I've moved probably 4 or 5 times, it feels like, in the last like 5 years of my life, from apartment to one rental to back to my parents and then into another rental. Like, it is a lot on a grown person moving that much in that short of a time frame. I can't even imagine how that must be for a child, because I mean, I moved twice, 3 times. The first 2 times I had no memory of because I was too little. But the third time was moving back to my home state. And I have some memory of it because I left an entire group of friends that I had in preschool. But coming up here in kindergarten, like, everything was fine. And then I grew up with all those kids. I still am friends. I married my high school sweetheart, and there are plenty of other kids in my position where they would have moved 6, 7 times, especially if their families are in the military. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think that the reason they feel like maybe it's temporary, and why maybe this is something maybe Esun's thinking of in some way in the back of her head, is everything just super temporary now. There's already been so much jostling around. I mean, Nasun was literally taken by her father away from the only home she's ever known. And then all of a sudden dropped in this random place, and she's fearing for her life because she's afraid her dad's going to kill her. Like, how much of her life is just filled with this fear of everything changing every single second?
And she may be under the impression for Nasoon that that community is where she's found a home because she's young. She's probably not thinking so far ahead. But Asun does know that where she stays at is temporary because she wants to go find her daughter. So she at least knows that. But it's still the idea, especially with her, that she's found all these little temporary communities that she's been involved in. And there's always some sort of loss attached to it. So that's really sad.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too, because it is very different in terms of temporariness. Where Esun, it's temporary because she's afraid that the people are gonna die, or people that she's gonna be the one to accidentally kill somebody, which is gonna then cause her to move on. Whereas Nasun, it's just uprooting entirely. Like, it's a very, very stark difference that I think is really interesting to bring up. Heard you mention Game of Thrones, just finished book 2. Nasun reminds me of Arya Stark with her ability to manipulate adults in order to survive. That is an interesting comparison, and I would agree with that. I think that Nasun is a little bit more innocent in a lot of ways than Arya. But I think that's also because she hasn't gone through half the things that Arya specifically has done by the time in Game of Thrones, by the time book 5 ends, at the very least. I'm not talking on the show because I've never seen the show. I'm talking on the books at this point. But yeah, there's a lot that Arya went through that I think justifies how she's able to manipulate people. Whereas Nasun, I think she's going to grow into that more so than now, because I think at this point she still has a little bit of innocence remaining. And another reason I'm considering, or I'm curious of what Shafa is going to do with her. Is he going to break that innocence of her to then change that and make her be able to then manipulate adults a little bit better?
I think we're already on that. Like, I feel like she has her finger on the pulse of survival, and that started when her dad killed Uche, and she kept saying "daddy, daddy" to kind of bring him out of that hate that she saw in his eyes towards her. But also, you were talking about Shafa breaking the innocence. I think she's already having that innocence broken, because remember they went to that Antarctic fulcrum and they basically just killed all the origins there.
Oh, yes, they did.
Yeah, and she was taking part in that. She had her little Taurus. Eventually, after they killed the 3 people in the room, he told her to go stand outside while they took care of all the other folks inside. But she already is having that innocence lost, and I think it's only going to get worse, especially with Still there, because Still is telling her, that, hey, I want you to kind of, I always say lasso the moon, but you're Still, that's telling her that's a very adult big boy position that he's putting her in. You have the weight of the world pretty much on your shoulders, So I think that she is growing up. And that's a note that I wrote, that in hard times and in times of survival, kids tend to grow up much faster because you have no choice. And that's the same thing with as soon training the origins over in like the children origins over in Castrima. Everybody's just kind of growing up quicker, whether they want to or not. I think the thing though is that she already has this ability she's been taught. So she is in a position to be able to grow up, I guess, in that ability and utilize her ability at the age she is now and have more control and power over it. Whereas all these other little kids can pretty much kill everybody around them because they didn't have that training.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing you bring up where, Nasun, she's having to grow up faster, obviously. I mean, I think that's pretty clear for all of us. She definitely is not innocent as much as she used to be. She's having to grow up a lot quicker. She's going to get worse as book 3 goes on, more than likely. How much do you want to bet that part of the reason she's able to take on all of that is because of the things she's learned from her mother? Because Esun also had to grow up very, very quickly when she was thrown into the barn by her own parents and told, you're going to wait here until somebody comes and gets you because we don't give a crap about you because you are evil to us. We don't want anything to do with you. So you're going to go away.
Not to mention the Fulcrum training was pretty tough. Like she's not getting Fulcrum training with Shafa because he's kind of changed his ways, which is endearing him to her more. But she got that Fulcrum training from her mom before she got there. So, and that was pretty tough. The whole breaking of the hands and then, control yourself, that's not normal teach my kid type thing, which is why she has issues with her mom. So right. I think that she's had a lot more life experience with the origin in particular than all the other kids have.
Yeah.
Because it learned her.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how each individual person, while they have in some ways very similar traumas, how they are very different people in a lot of ways. Because I think Asun's bitterness is more in the fact that she's lost so many people unintentionally, whether through the means of because of other people or because she had to protect herself and had to hurt other people. Whereas I'm willing to bet Nasun's going to be kind of the opposite of that, where she's going to hurt whoever she believes she needs to for what she believes as the greater good. And I think it's going to be incredibly sad, but I'm very excited to see how that ultimate battle between mom and daughter turns out. And with that, I think, unless Courtney, you have anything else you want to touch on, I think that might be where we end today's live show.
I was thinking of something about Hoa, about how he said that, because remember he was that fourth perspective of, something about he was going to betray Esun. So I'm curious about what that is. Because he was like something about, I can't remember. But anyway, he said basically that he was going to betray her in some way. So I think that's pretty interesting. But also the Stone Eaters. Remember they were saying that Father Earth made the Stone Eaters being part of the earth to make them harmless because he was upset with like humans. So I wonder if that's pretty interesting when they kept talking about Castrima of how people knew such and such. And then Alabaster was alluding to the fact that basically the walls have ears. So I think the Stone Eaters are going to play a much bigger part as well.
Oh, yeah. I can almost count on that just because of the fact that Steel got involved with Nasun, and now we have one on either side. I am willing to bet that there may even be more story involving the Stone Eaters than we realize. Like there's a history, maybe there's factions, maybe there's camps of ideologies, just like there are with the humans. I think that's entirely possible because we don't know much about the world itself and how everything got built right now. So I'd be willing to bet that part of the Stone Sky is going to go into a lot of that and explaining a lot of that history. That's, I think, one of the things I'm going to be looking for the most when it comes to that. So Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just keep thinking of random stuff. This is something I want to say. Tonki. I was upset
Oh,
Tonki
yes.
did not have a bigger part in the book. I hope that there's because Tonki, I think is a great fun character. She's wild and out there. I'm happy she found a little snugga, so I'm happy about that. But I'm hoping that Tonki has somewhat of a bigger part in the third book, because pretty much in here, I mean, she helped them kind of discover, like, I guess her whole part was so we can talk about the control room and like some of the silver or whatnot. But it would have been nice to hear a little bit more. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I totally forgot about Tonki. I paid more attention to Tonki in the first book than I did in this one.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, I totally forgot that was a whole thing where she got into a whole relationship and she got some. And I remember being like in the book, I was like, yeah, Tonki, let's go. But I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Although Esun kept talking about how she basically is stinky and funky, but I guess that other person liked it. What did she say? I guess something about the big woman. Oh my gosh. I forgot. She just said something about the big woman. I don't know. Anyway, something, I don't know, but something about a gruff person with the social skills of a rock. I was like, wow, you're real tough on that one. Did not sugarcoat that. But yes, Tonki is stinky, but she still found love. So I'm good with that.
Yep. Everybody deserves it. Everyone deserves love. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you smell like flowers and daisies, or daisies are a flower, or if you smell like absolute garbage. Everybody deserves love.
There you go.
Okay, guys. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. Courtney, thank you again for joining me. I would love to have you on again for book 3. I mean, at this point, I think you definitely should be a part of that discussion.
I will try my best. I plan to read it. I have it in another room.
Yep. It's all right. But yeah, so if you guys want to join us for the next live show, it is going to be the first weekend of April, which is going to be April 1st. It's going to be April Fool's Day. So don't worry, it's not an April Fool's joke. We're doing the live show. I'm not gonna skip out on you guys. But yes, we're gonna do the live show for The Stone Sky, the final book in the Broken Earth trilogy, on April 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just like we did tonight. And in April, we are also going to be going through 2 books. There's going to be a graphic novel and a novel, which I'll talk more about in that live show, and you guys will also see it in my April TBR and all that stuff. But for those of you that are brand new getting into this, we in the month of March are going to be, like I said, reading The Stone Sky, which is the final book in the Broken Earth trilogy. So for those of you that have been a part of both of these live shows, thank you so much for joining. And I hope to see you guys in that live show, because I think that it's going to be really interesting based on a lot of the theories we talked about today. I think a lot of things are going to come to a head, and I'm very excited to see ultimately how this first series that we are all reading of N.K. Jemisin's together is going to go, because this is her most popular series, I believe, right now. And I'm excited to see how it ultimately ends, since this is a series that has each book won significant awards. Like, the Hugo Awards are huge for young adult. And obviously, they are rightly so. I think that she definitely deserved it. These are wonderful books. And I hope you guys will also then stick around to see the other books that we're going to be reading, because we're going to be reading even more of her throughout the rest of the year. In the description, I will leave the read-along video. If you guys are new and want to know more about this read-along I am hosting. And if you want to join me, and maybe even Courtney, if Courtney ends up deciding to do more past the Broken Earth trilogy with me, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to have more hosts come and join me on these live shows. I think it would be super, super fun. And I'm just so, so excited to continue with more of this. Courtney, thank you so much again for joining today. All right, everyone. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful night and a wonderful rest of your weekend. And I will see all of you guys if you're going to go to see Bree and Brandy for Mulebone. I'm going to be hopped over there because I read Mulebone also, and I have some things to say on it. So we'll see how that goes. But thanks, everybody, and have a great night.
Bye. Bye.